A single bell toll could command an entire medieval city. Long before clocks or calendars, these resonant instruments orchestrated every aspect of daily life. This is the secret history of bells, a story where sound scheduled work, enforced power, and bound communities together. By the end of this journey, you will hear the echoes of a world built not on what people saw, but on what they heard. We will uncover how a ringing bell could start a riot, why a silent bell tower was a terrifying punishment, and how this forgotten network of sound was the original internet of its day. What does the rhythm of your own day sound like? A single clapper, perhaps just a piece of metal struck by a herder to keep track of sheep, held the entire future of the bell within its simple ring. This was the seed. From these humble, secular beginnings, the bell's journey into the heart of society began within the isolated, disciplined world of early Christian monasteries. Here, the rhythm of life was not set by the sun alone, but by prayer. The call to worship needed to be clear and consistent, reaching monks scattered across gardens, scriptoriums, and fields. The bell became that voice, marking the 8 canonical hours that structured the monastic day, from the night vigil of matins to the evening prayer of compline. Its sound was a command to stop work, to gather, to focus the mind on the divine. This regular, rhythmic ringing was the first true schedule imposed by sound, a template that would eventually be stamped onto every waking moment of the medieval world. But a small handbell could only reach so far. The true transformation came with a revolution in metallurgy. Early medieval bell founders learned to cast larger, heavier bells from bronze, creating instruments of profound resonance. Their deep, sonorous tones could now carry for miles, rolling across valleys and over town walls. This was the critical technological leap. The bell was no longer just a noisemaker, it was a broadcast system. Its voice became so central to spiritual life that it was treated as a sacred being. Bells were often formally baptized in elaborate ceremonies, given names and godparents, and believed to possess the power to ward off evil spirits and storms. They became, in the ears of the faithful, the literal voice of God on earth, a holy sound that could touch every soul within its acoustic reach. How did a simple tool become the central nervous system of an entire civilization? It learned to speak with a voice that everyone, from the lowest peasant to the highest lord, was compelled to obey. That first bell at dawn was a command that echoed through every cramped street and humble dwelling. It was the reveille, a clear signal that the day's labor must now begin, but it was just the opening note in a complex symphony of sound that scheduled an entire town. Next came the prime bell, marking the official start of the work morning, sending artisans to their workshops and laborers to the fields. The deep toll of the noon bell did not merely note the time, it granted permission for a midday meal and a precious hour of rest. And as dusk fell, the final, solemn voice of the day rang out, the curfew bell. Its name comes from the Old French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. This was an order to douse hearths for safety and to retire for the night, bringing all public life to a close. Each of these signals had its own distinct rhythm and character, creating an audible timetable that synchronized the actions of thousands. There were no punch clocks, no personal watches, no memos. The entire economy, from the baker firing his oven to the blacksmith striking his anvil, moved to the rhythm of these bells. This sonic scheduling was the invisible engine of medieval productivity, ensuring fields were tended, goods were made, and markets operated in perfect unison. The language of the bells formed a public clock that everyone, regardless of their wealth or whether they could read a single word, could instinctively understand. Its authority was absolute. To ignore the call to work was to risk your livelihood. To be caught in the streets after curfew was to invite suspicion and punishment. The soundscape was not just a convenience, it was a system of control woven directly into the fabric of daily life. But who controlled the hand that swung the clapper? The power to command a town with sound was a prize that would not go uncontested for long. The power to ring the bell was the power to be heard by everyone at once. That sonic reach wove an invisible web of social control, turning the bell tower into a kind of auditory panopticon, a watchtower whose gaze was replaced by a voice. Its most potent tool was the tocsin, the alarm bell. A frantic, urgent pealing could rally the town militia against an approaching army or send citizens running with buckets to fight a fire. Yet this same sound could be used to quell internal unrest, to summon forces against a riot or a peasant revolt. The bell was the ultimate emergency broadcast system, but the authority to activate it belonged solely to the ruling powers. The daily, predictable ringing of the work bells served a deeper purpose, reinforcing social norms and the established hierarchy. Every toll for prayer was a reminder of your duty to God. Every bell marking the start of the Lord's fields was a reminder of your duty to your master. This constant, rhythmic soundtrack conditioned the population to a life of order and obedience. To live within earshot of the bells was to live within the bounds of accepted society. Conversely, to be outside their sound, in a remote forest hut or on the distant edges of a parish, was to be marginal, even suspect. Your life was not synchronized with the community, but the most profound power of the bell did not always lie in the sounds it made. Its greatest influence came from its silent, looming potential. The bell was always there, a dormant force hanging over the town. The knowledge that it could ring out at any moment with a call to arms, a cry of danger, or a condemnation created a self-policing society. You behaved as if you were always being listened for, because the instrument that could define your actions as lawful or criminal was poised to speak. This was a discipline enforced not by the constant sight of a guard, but by the ever-present possibility of that single, authoritative voice. And when that voice was taken away, the silence itself became a weapon of terrifying power. But this absolute authority could not remain in one pair of hands forever. The bell tower itself became a battleground, its height a declaration of power in an ongoing war between church and state for control of the public ear. This was a silent, architectural conflict fought over who had the right to command the soundscape. For centuries, the monastery's call to prayer had been the dominant rhythm of the day. Yet as towns grew richer and more independent, their civic leaders demanded their own voice. They fought for the privilege of a band bell, a distinct tone that would ring out to announce market days, public meetings, and new civic decrees. This was a direct challenge to the church's long-held monopoly over time itself. Imagine the confusion and the tension when two different bells from two different towers rang out in quick succession, one calling citizens to prayer and the other summoning them to a town square to hear a proclamation from the mayor. Which sound would you obey? This negotiation of power was not just symbolic, it was a daily auditory reality. A bishop, locked in a dispute with a local lord, might order his bells rung incessantly to drown out civic announcements and reassert his spiritual dominance. In retaliation, that lord could impose harsh new laws, physically seizing the bell ropes or forbidding the clergy from ringing their bells at all. The very skyline told this story of competition. A town hall would raise its tower, aiming to surpass the church spire next door. Each faction built higher and higher, not just for glory, but to ensure that their voice, their laws, and their authority carried farthest across the fields and rooftops. In this world, to be heard was to be in charge. The medieval soundscape was not a static backdrop, but a dynamic and fiercely contested political field, where power was literally heard before it was ever seen. Above the grand contest between church and civic towers, a more practical symphony of bells played out daily in the marketplace. Here, the air was thick with the distinct chimes of guild bells, each one orchestrating a specific part of the town's economic life. If the great church bell was the conductor of the soul, and the town bell the conductor of the law, then the guild bells were the section leaders of commerce, each managing their own instrumental part in the urban orchestra. A baker did not wait for the general prime bell to start his oven. He listened for the specific, higher-pitched ring of his own guild's bell, a signal that his fellow bakers were now permitted to sell the morning's fresh loaves. Across the square, the deep, resonant toll of the wool merchant's bell would mark the official opening of the cloth hall, authorizing the day's haggling over fleeces and fine broadcloth. This created a layered soundscape where a trained ear could diagnose the health of the entire economy just by listening. A frantic, overlapping chorus of rings suggested a market day booming with activity, while a sparse, hesitant pealing might hint at a shortage of goods or a dip in merchant confidence. The purpose of these bells went far beyond simple scheduling. They were instruments of quality control and collective identity. When a guild bell rang to summon members, it often meant a quality inspection was about to begin. Guild wardens would examine the work of butchers, candlemakers, or blacksmiths, ensuring that a pound of bread was truly a pound and that a piece of forged iron was strong enough to bear weight. A craftsman whose goods failed this audit could face fines or public shaming, his reputation tied directly to the integrity his guild's bell represented. This sound became a promise to the public, a guarantee of standard and fair price. The bell also settled disputes behind closed doors, its call gathering members to resolve conflicts over spoiled materials or stolen techniques. To hear your guild's bell was to be reminded that you were part of something larger than your own workshop. You were a link in a chain of craftsmanship, bound by oath and sound to your peers. This fostered a powerful collective identity, turning the chaotic noise of individual trades into a harmonious rhythm of regulated commerce. The sound of the guild bell was the sound of trust, a sonic seal of approval that wove the economy directly into the town's social fabric. Yet, even as the bells of commerce regulated the business of life, another, more somber tone managed its final transition. A slow, deliberate toll would cut through the market's chatter, a sound that commanded immediate attention and silence. This was the passing bell, and its message was absolute. Someone in the community had died, but this was far more than a simple announcement. It was a carefully coded ritual. The specific pattern of rings conveyed vital information. A certain number of tolls might signify whether the departed was a man, a woman, or a child. The rhythm and weight of the strikes could hint at their social standing, telling the town whether they mourned a humble carpenter or the local lord. Upon hearing this solemn voice, every activity ceased. The blacksmith would set down his hammer, the baker would pause his kneading. For a few moments, the entire town was united in a single, shared purpose. Each person, no matter their station, was silently invited to offer a prayer for the soul of their neighbor, to aid its passage into the afterlife. In an instant, private grief was transformed into a public obligation, a collective act of spiritual support that reinforced the bonds holding the community together. This sonic ritual served another, deeper purpose for the living. The passing bell was a memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning remember you must die. Its regular, sobering peal was an auditory reminder of mortality for everyone who heard it. It prompted personal reflection on the state of one's own soul and encouraged acts of charity and kindness, as the fleeting nature of life was made starkly audible. The bell thereby managed the most profound and disruptive human experience, weaving the reality of death directly into the daily soundscape. It ensured that even in its final moments, a person's life resonated through the community, their departure marked not with a whimper, but with a deliberate, resonant voice that bound the living ever closer together. But what happened when the community itself was under threat? The same bell that solemnly marked an end could also scream a frantic, urgent warning. When the sky turned black and the wind began to howl, a different, more frantic bell would join the chorus. This was the storm bell, and its ringing was a matter of life and death. As thunder cracked and lightning split the heavens, the sacred sound was believed to be a physical weapon against the storm itself. In a world where science had not yet explained weather, a violent tempest was not a natural phenomenon. It was an act of divine wrath, a siege by malevolent spirits riding the winds. The community's most powerful sonic tool became their only defense. The bell ringers, often clergy, would risk their lives climbing the trembling tower to seize the ropes, sending out a desperate, clamorous peal into the chaos. They believed the baptized bell's holy voice could shatter the storm clouds, drive away the evil spirits causing the lightning, and form a protective sonic dome over their homes and fields. This practice, known as tempest ringing, was the ultimate expression of faith in the bell's power. It was a collective plea, a sonic negotiation with the terrifying forces of the divine. Every frantic clang was a prayer made audible, a hopeful noise against the overwhelming roar of the unknown. The sound offered the illusion of control, a way for a vulnerable community to actively fight back against the apocalypse descending from the skies. Yet this profound belief came with a cruel irony. The very act meant to save lives often claimed them. Lightning, drawn to the tall, metallic tower, frequently struck, electrocuting the faithful ringers in the act of their devotion. For centuries, this was seen as a tragic but noble sacrifice. However, as the age of enlightenment dawned, authorities began to discourage the practice, not out of disbelief in God, but out of a growing understanding of physics. They recognized the bell tower as a lightning rod, not a spiritual shield. The slow end of tempest ringing marked a pivotal shift in the human relationship with nature, moving from a world governed by spiritual intervention to one beginning to be understood through natural law. The storm bell, in its desperate, hopeful ringing, perfectly captures a moment in time when the soundscape was the primary interface between a fearful humanity and a mysterious, often angry, God. The power of a bell began not in the tower but in the fire. To create an instrument whose voice could command a town required a volatile alchemy of art, science, and faith, all converging in the dramatic spectacle of the bell foundry. This was not a quiet workshop but a place of roaring furnaces, searing heat, and immense, terrifying pressure. The master founder was more than a craftsman. He was a magician of metal, guarding secret recipes for bronze passed down through generations. His alloy was a precise mixture of copper and tin, a formula that, if wrong by even a small margin, could yield a bell that sounded dull, cracked on its first ring, or simply refused to sing. The creation of the mold itself was a monumental undertaking, built in a deep casting pit from a core of brick and loam shaped to the bell's interior, and a cope, a giant inverted jacket, forming the intricate outer surface where inscriptions and sacred images would be pressed. This entire, painstaking process was a public drama. The casting of a great bell was a major civic event, drawing crowds who watched and prayed as the founder and his crew, after days of preparation, tapped the furnace. A river of molten, glowing bronze, a substance often called the blood of the earth, would flow into the mold, its success or failure determining the acoustic soul of their community for centuries. The founder had to be a musician and a physicist long before those titles were common. He meticulously calculated the shape, thickness, and profile of the bell to produce not just a noise, but a specific musical note with a rich tapestry of harmonics. He was sculpting sound in metal, predicting the complex interplay of tones that would give the bell its unique voice, a voice that needed to be both commanding and beautiful, capable of instilling both fear and comfort. A successful casting was met with jubilation, a sign of divine favor for the entire town. But a failure, a bell that cracked or rang with a dead, flat tone, was seen as a terrible omen, a public shaming for the founder and a bad portent for the community's future. The creation of these instruments was as much a part of their mystique as the sounds they produced, a tangible link between human ingenuity, the raw power of nature, and the hopes of an entire population. High in the shadowy bell tower, a world away from the crowded streets below, worked the true masters of the medieval soundscape. The bell ringer was far more than a simple laborer. He was an athlete, a musician, and a keeper of sacred time, his entire body and spirit dedicated to the precise execution of the town's sonic schedule. His work required a unique combination of brute force and delicate finesse. Pulling the heavy, hemp-woven ropes demanded immense physical strength, a constant battle against the massive, swinging weight of the bronze bell. Yet this was not mere hauling. It was a performance. The ringer had to possess an innate, unshakable sense of rhythm, feeling the exact moment to pull and release to create the specific tolls, peals, and patterns that conveyed distinct messages to the town. A single, deep boom for a death, a rapid, frantic succession for a fire, a steady, measured rhythm for the call to prayer. Each sequence was a word in a language only he could speak aloud for everyone to hear. This was not a skill learned in a week. It was a craft passed down through generations, often from father to son, creating a hereditary class of sonic artisans. These men formed powerful, exclusive guilds that fiercely protected the secrets of their trade. They negotiated wages, enforced strict standards, and guarded the sacred responsibility of their office from outsiders. To them, the bell was not just metal, it was a living voice they were sworn to care for. The complex system of ropes and wheels in the belfry was their instrument, and the entire town was their concert hall. They were the vital, human link between the silent, dormant bell and the listening, waiting community. The pressure on these individuals was immense. A mistimed ring, a clumsy rhythm, or a dropped rope could throw the entire market into confusion. A funeral toll that sounded hesitant or weak might be seen as a bad omen for the departed soul, bringing shame upon the family and spiritual anxiety upon the ringer himself. His role was to be invisible yet omnipresent, a nameless musician playing the timeline of life itself, his every action resonating through the lives of thousands. He held the town's schedule, its safety, and its very spirit in his calloused hands. Your world ended where the bell's voice faded into the wind. This was the most fundamental border in medieval life, an invisible line drawn not on any map but in the air itself. The parish boundary was first and foremost a sonic territory. If you could hear your local church bell clearly, you knew you were home under its spiritual care and legal authority. Your tithes were due to that church, your children were baptized there, and its courts held sway over you. This auditory mapping created a powerful sense of belonging. The sound was a constant, reassuring reminder that you were part of a community, woven into its social and spiritual fabric. But step by step, as you walked away, the bell's toll would grow fainter, until one day you could no longer hear it at all. At that precise point, you had crossed a frontier. You were now in a different acoustic domain, subject to a different set of bells, a different lord, and a different god. Your identity was fundamentally tied to the soundscape you inhabited. This system of sonic borders led to a complex and often contentious overlap of territories. The deep, resonant bells of a wealthy and powerful abbey could carry for miles, their sound washing over the smaller, weaker chimes of a humble village church. When the abbey's bell rang for Mass, it did not just call its own monks. It effectively silenced the local parish bell, commanding the attention and obedience of everyone in the area. This was not an accident. It was a deliberate demonstration of hegemony, a way for a powerful institution to assert its dominance audibly every single day. The sound itself was the claim to authority. This concept crystallized in the very word for a town's legal dominion, the banlieue. Today it might mean a suburb, but its original meaning was the ban area, the lieu or league where the town's ban bell held the force of law. Your rights, your obligations, and your safety were defined by whether you could hear that specific civic bell. If a criminal fled the town, pursuit would often stop at the edge of the banlieue, the point where the town's authority, broadcast by its bell, officially ended. This created a world experienced primarily through the ears. You understood space not by sight but by sound. You knew you were entering a new lord's lands when a different bell's tone greeted you. You felt the presence of a distant monastery long before you saw its spire because its sound reached out and touched you first. These were invisible walls, but they were as real and as consequential as any stone barrier. Your allegiance, your legal status, and your very sense of self were orchestrated by the bells you lived within. The landscape was not just something you saw, it was something you heard, and the soundscape was the true architecture of power. A city's bells did not merely announce peace, they declared war. In times of conflict, their voices transformed from tools of order into weapons of psychological warfare and propaganda. The triumphant, ecstatic pealing that followed a military victory was more than just celebration. It was a sonic cleansing of the air, washing away the fear of siege and replacing it with a collective roar of relief. This clamor was carefully orchestrated by the victors to boost morale and demonstrate their unchallenged power, its echoes rolling over the countryside to warn rivals and reassure allies. But for the defeated, the fate of their bells was a profound humiliation. Captured bells were the ultimate trophies of war, prized not for their metal but for their symbolic weight. They were often dragged back to the victor's city and hoisted into their belfry, forced to ring for their new masters. Every peal from these stolen voices was a public reminder of conquest, a daily auditory mockery of the defeated town's lost autonomy. Some were even melted down and recast into cannons, transforming an instrument of spiritual community into a tool of destruction, the ultimate perversion of its sacred purpose. The absence of sound could be an even more potent weapon than its presence. A city negotiating surrender might formally agree to cease ringing its bells, a powerful and universally understood symbol of submission. The sudden silence falling over a besieged town was the sound of hope extinguished, a communal admission that its defenses were broken and its spirit crushed. This auditory surrender was as binding as any signed document. Conversely, the most terrifying silence was imposed from outside through the papal punishment of interdict. When a town or kingdom fell under interdict, the church ordered all bells to be stilled. No call to mass, no comforting toll for the dead, no rhythmic marking of the hours. The familiar soundscape that had structured life and provided spiritual comfort simply vanished, replaced by an eerie, oppressive quiet. This silence was meant to be unbearable, a spiritual suffocation designed to turn the population against their ruler and compel obedience to Rome. The bells, therefore, became a direct barometer of a community's fortune. Their vibrant, regular ringing signaled peace, stability, and divine favor. Their silence, whether from defeat or punishment, signaled despair, subjugation, and a community cut off from grace. You could literally hear the health of a town in its tower, making every peal a statement of power and every silence a cry of defeat. That sudden, unnatural quiet was a punishment that touched every soul. In a world orchestrated by bells, their abrupt and total silence was a form of collective sensory deprivation, a spiritual suffocation imposed from the highest authority. When a pope placed a town under interdict, the bell ropes hung still. The familiar call to mass vanished, the comforting toll for the dead ceased, the rhythmic markers of the workday simply stopped. This was not a minor inconvenience, it was a profound disorientation. The community was stripped of its sacred soundtrack, left floating in an eerie, unstructured void. The silence itself was the penalty, a deliberate act meant to terrify the population into demanding their rulers' repentance. It made the divine feel absent, as if God himself had stopped listening. This imposed quiet was a weapon that turned the town's own soundscape against it. The same principle operated on a smaller, somber scale. At the death of a monarch, a great bell would be tolled and then deliberately silenced, often wrapped in black cloth to muffle any accidental sound. This created a period of official mourning where the usual rhythms of life were suspended. The silence was a shared public grief, a sonic representation of a kingdom holding its breath. In a society built on audible signals, the absence of sound was never an accident. It was a calculated message. A silent bell tower could express more than 1,000 rings, communicating disgrace, loss, or divine displeasure with a clarity that words could never match. The soundscape was a two-sided coin, and the quiet side was often the most powerful. It proved that true authority lay not just in the power to speak, but in the power to command silence. This constant, resonant rhythm was the heartbeat of the medieval world, a psychological anchor in an otherwise unpredictable life. The daily tolling did more than just organize tasks, it organized thought itself, reinforcing a profound belief in a divinely ordained cosmic order. Every predictable ring at prime, noon, and curfew was a reassurance that the universe was not chaotic, but was operating according to a sacred and knowable plan. This sonic predictability provided a deep, often unconscious sense of security. You did not need to worry about when to start work or when it was safe to sleep. The soundscape managed that for you, freeing your mind from the anxiety of timekeeping and allowing you to focus on the immediate demands of survival. The bell was a kind of collective conscience, an external voice that internalized society's rules and rhythms, making them feel as natural as your own heartbeat. This shared auditory experience forged a powerful collective consciousness. When the entire town stopped at the death knell to pray, or rushed to the square at the sound of the band bell, they were not just following orders. They were participating in a shared emotional ritual. This created a palpable sense of we, a communal identity that was literally sounded into existence multiple times a day. You knew you belonged because you were listening to the same story everyone else was hearing and responding in unison. The bells were masterful conductors of emotion, conditioning entire populations to feel on cue. The wild, joyous pealing of a festival day triggered an immediate collective euphoria, a release from the grind of daily labor. The frantic clanging of the tocsin injected pure adrenaline, sharpening focus into a unified fear and readiness for action. The slow, mournful toll for a passing soul guided the community into a shared state of reverence and grief. These were not mere signals, they were emotional scripts. The soundscape told you not only what to do, but how to feel about it, weaving the fabric of individual psychology directly into the social identity of the town. Your inner emotional life was in many ways a public performance orchestrated by the bronze voice in the tower. Beyond the town walls, the world grew quiet, and the bell's voice became a fragile thread connecting isolated lives. For a peasant working a strip of land miles from the nearest village, the sound of the parish bell was not one layer in a crowded chorus. It was a lone, distant call across the fields, a vital lifeline to the community and the grace of God. Its reach was limited by hills and valleys, creating vast pockets of auditory solitude where the dominant sounds were the wind in the trees, the call of birds, and the lowing of one's own oxen. In these spaces, the rhythm of life was set less by the town's precise schedule and more by the sun's arc and the demands of the soil. A traveler on foot, moving from one village to the next, would experience this shifting soundscape firsthand. He would walk out of the acoustic territory of his home bell, its familiar tone fading into a silence broken only by nature, until the distinct, perhaps slightly higher-pitched, ring of the next parish's bell greeted him. This was the sound of a new jurisdiction, a different community with its own customs and loyalties. This auditory isolation bred a powerful localism. Your world was defined by what you could hear, and for most rural dwellers, that was the single voice of their parish church and the few dozen families within its sonic reach. News did not travel at the speed of a bell's peal, but at the speed of a walking man or a galloping horse. The arrival of a messenger or a traveling peddler was a major event, the only way to learn of a king's death, a distant war, or a plague in a neighboring county. In this context, the bell's call was perhaps even more critical than in the town. It was the primary, and often the only, marker of time, community, and spiritual belonging for those living on the geographic and social margins. Its weekly call to Mass was not just an obligation but a rare opportunity for social connection, a chance to see neighbors, share news, and feel part of something larger than one's own isolated homestead. The sound that scheduled a town's commerce was, in the countryside, the sound that held loneliness at bay. The bell was so much more than a tool. It was a living character in the town's collective story. In the folklore that flourished in the shadows of these towers, bells developed their own personalities, their own wills, and even their own moral compass. People told stories of bells that rang with no human hand on the rope, tolling a grim warning of an approaching plague or an imminent invasion. There were tales of bells that fell silent and refused to ring on the anniversary of a great injustice, as if in mourning for a wrong that had never been righted. These were not seen as mechanical failures or the wind playing tricks. They were understood as the conscious acts of a sentient being, a guardian spirit made of bronze. This personification transformed the bell from an instrument into a citizen, one with a deep voice and a long memory. Perhaps the most haunting legends are those of the sunken bells. Across Europe, stories persist of bells lying at the bottom of lakes or rivers, lost to floods or wars, yet still heard tolling from the depths on certain nights. The sound was said to be muffled, ghostly, a call from a drowned world. These narratives were not mere ghost stories. They were a way for a community to process profound loss and trauma. The sunken bell was a metaphor for a village submerged by a reservoir, a way of life erased by progress or disaster. Its continued, phantom ringing asserted that the memory of that place and the people who lived there could never be fully silenced. The bell became the keeper of a sunken history, its voice a bridge between the present and a past that refused to be forgotten. In literature, this tradition continued. Great writers wove bells into their narratives as active agents of fate. A bell might chime at a critical moment, forcing a character to confront a terrible secret or make a life-altering choice. In some stories, a bell's curse follows a family for generations, its peal a reminder of a stolen inheritance or a broken vow. These literary bells are never neutral. They are judges, they are witnesses, they hold the conscience of the community and demand accountability in a way human law often could not. This rich tapestry of folklore and literature reveals the ultimate truth about the medieval soundscape. The bell was not just something people heard, it was something they listened to, conversed with, and trusted. It was a member of the community with a voice that could warn, mourn, judge, and remember long after any single individual was gone. Then came a theological earthquake that sought to silence the bells altogether. The Protestant Reformation did not just challenge papal authority, it declared war on the entire medieval sensorium, and its primary sonic target was the bell tower. Radical reformers like John Calvin and Huldrych Zwingli heard not the voice of God in the resonant peals, but the clamor of superstition. To them, the elaborate rituals of baptism, the belief that bells could ward off storms, and the rhythmic call to prayer were all remnants of a magical, unscriptural Catholicism that had to be purged. This was not a minor adjustment in worship, it was a fundamental sensory re-education. In city after city that fell to the Reformed cause, the result was a profound and unsettling quiet. Bells were forcibly silenced, their ropes cut. They were torn down from their towers and smashed, or hauled away to be melted into something useful like cannons or coins. The familiar soundtrack of life, which had structured days and comforted souls for centuries, was systematically erased. The new soundscape of reformed regions became starkly austere. The focus shifted from the symbolic, emotional power of the bell to the intellectual clarity of the spoken word. The sermon now reigned supreme, with the preacher's voice demanding individual understanding rather than collective ritual. This created a sensory divide as stark as the theological one. A traveler crossing from a Catholic territory into a Protestant one would experience a jarring transition from a world animated by ringing to a world of relative quiet, punctuated only by the human voice from the pulpit. The control of the soundscape became a bloody frontline in the religious wars. To seize a town was to seize its bell tower. Catholic armies would triumphantly restore the ringing the moment they recaptured a city, seeing it as the divine voice reclaiming its territory. Protestant forces, in turn, would often demolish the belfries as completely as they destroyed altars. The very presence or absence of ringing bells became the simplest way to know who held power and what faith was enforced. This was a brutal demonstration that belief was not just a matter of what was written in a book or professed with a tongue. Faith was a sound you heard with your own ears, and the battle for Europe's soul was fought over who had the right to fill the air with meaning. A sharp, distinct peal cut through the familiar rhythms of the workday, a sound that demanded more than prayer or prophet. This was the voice of the law itself, ringing from the courthouse or town hall tower. Its call summoned every eligible citizen not to mass but to court. When this bell sounded, the blacksmith had to lay down his hammer and the merchant had to leave his stall. Participation was not a choice, it was a civic duty, a direct order to engage in the legal machinery that bound the community together. The bell assembled the jury, gathered witnesses, and called the accused to stand before their peers. Its sound pulled the entire town away from private life and into the public sphere of judgment and order. This was the secular authority making itself heard, ensuring that justice was not a private affair but a communal event witnessed by all. The same bell that called the court to session also announced its most severe conclusions. A public execution was not a clandestine act, it was a carefully staged civic drama, and the bell provided the soundtrack. Its toll would begin long before the condemned was led to the scaffold, a slow, grim metronome that drew the entire population into the town square. This solemn ringing served a crucial purpose, transforming a violent punishment into a ritual of reaffirmed order. The sound framed the event, giving it a terrible gravity and reminding everyone present that this was the lawful consequence of breaking the community's covenant. It was the state audibly demonstrating its monopoly on violence, a controlled and sanctioned act meant to deter future crime by showcasing the ultimate price. But the legal bell was not only an instrument of fear, its voice could also ring with hope, proclaiming new laws, royal pardons, or the end of attacks. The specific pattern of its peal would tell the listening town whether the news was dire or celebratory. In this way, the bell managed the entire emotional spectrum of civic life, from the dread of a criminal trial to the relief of a granted amnesty. It was the central nervous system of the body politic, and every citizen was a nerve ending responding to its call. To hear the courthouse bell was to be reminded that you were not just a soul under God or a worker in a guild, but a subject of the law with all the protections and obligations that status entailed. Its sound was the very echo of the social contract, a constant reminder that order was not a given, but a construct maintained by collective participation and enforced by a single, authoritative voice. But on feast days and during the riotous celebrations of Carnival, that disciplined voice broke into a wild, ecstatic shout. The slow, measured tolling for work and prayer vanished, replaced by a joyous, chaotic peal that filled the sky with an almost frantic energy. Every bell in the city seemed to ring at once, a rapid, celebratory clangor that was the official sound of sanctioned disorder. This was not a command to labor or to pray, but an invitation to revel. The festival peal announced a world turned upside down, a temporary suspension of all the rigid rules that governed daily existence. Social norms were inverted, with peasants mocking lords and servants commanding masters in playful theatrics. The air grew thick with the smells of roasting meat and spiced wine, as the strictures of frugality were cast aside for collective abundance. This sonic frenzy marked liminal time, a sacred period set apart from the ordinary, where the usual hierarchies and behaviors no longer applied. The contrast was everything. The same bronze instrument that enforced the drudgery of the workday now liberated the spirit. This rhythmic alternation between discipline and release was not a flaw in the system, it was the system's genius. The community needed that pressure valve, that scheduled explosion of joy to make the relentless order of everyday life bearable. The wild ringing provided a psychological reset, a collective catharsis that actually reinforced the social fabric by allowing people to momentarily step outside of it. The exuberant peal and the solemn toll were two sides of the same coin, the inhale and exhale of a living community, bound together by the cyclical voice of the bell that knew both when to command and when to let go. The bell tower was a massive musical instrument, and the entire church was its carefully crafted amplifier. Medieval builders understood sound as a physical force that could be shaped and directed by stone and space. They were not just constructing a visual landmark, they were engineering an acoustic beacon. The height of the tower was the first critical calculation, lifting the sound source above the clutter of rooftops to let the waves travel cleanly across the landscape. The belfry itself was not a sealed room but an acoustic shell, its sides punctuated by large, open louvers. These were not merely decorative windows, they were precisely angled vents designed to blast the bell's voice outward in specific directions, channeling the sound over the marketplace, down the main streets, and toward the outlying fields. The stone used in the tower's construction was selected for its density and hardness, creating a resonant chamber that would ring with the bell's strike rather than absorb it. This was architecture in service of sound, a physical structure whose ultimate purpose was to vanish, leaving only its voice to dominate the air. The entire community was arranged within this designed acoustic sphere. Houses clustered more densely within the clearest range of the bell, their very placement a testament to the sound's power. To live closer to the tower was to live closer to the heart of the community, both spiritually and legally. This created a sonic geography where your address was determined by your ability to hear, a world where the most important walls were the invisible ones made of fading sound. The bell tower did not simply occupy space, it actively created its own territory through acoustics, making the landscape itself an echo of its voice. A single great bell represented a fortune in solidified bronze, an alloy of copper and tin that was costly to source and perilous to cast. This was not merely a spiritual instrument, it was a community's most prominent and public financial asset. In times of desperate need, during a siege or a devastating famine, the bell was often the first resource to be leveraged. Town councils would formally mortgage their bells to wealthy merchants or neighboring abbeys, trading their sonic soul for the grain and gold needed for survival. The silent, mortgaged bell hanging in the tower was a humiliating advertisement of a town's poverty, a constant, visible reminder of its broken economy. Worse still was the fate of bells confronted by an invading army. To a military commander, a captured bell was not a sacred object, it was a pile of ready-made artillery. Thousands of bells across Europe were torn down from their towers and hauled away to foundries, where they were melted and recast into cannons and cannonballs. This created a grim, circular economy where the very instrument that once warned of attack was transformed into the weapon of the attacker. The life story of many famous bells is a brutal saga of destruction and rebirth, a cycle of creation and plunder that could see the same bronze fought over for generations. This deep economic dimension meant that the soundscape was a direct barometer of a town's material security. A full, harmonious peal of bells was a powerful, audible declaration that the community was prosperous, stable, and safe. It was a public display of economic health that everyone could hear. Conversely, a reduced number of rings or the silence of a mortgaged bell signaled financial distress as clearly as a dropped stock price would today. The very existence of a large bell was a monumental achievement, a testament to a community's ability to pool its vast resources for a common, audible good. When you heard the bells ring, you were not just hearing a call to prayer, you were hearing the successful investment of an entire town, a sonic monument to collective wealth and shared sacrifice. You could not escape the voice of the bell. In an age where few could read a single sentence, written words were silent, locked away on costly parchment. They required light, focused attention, and the rare skill of literacy to be understood. But sound was a universal language. The bell's call penetrated thick stone walls, reached into the dimmest workshops, and washed over fields without demanding anyone stop their labor. This fundamental reality created a world where your ears were your most vital connection to the community, far more than your eyes. The public square might host a notice nailed to a post, but it was a silent message for the privileged few. The bell, however, was a shouted proclamation for everyone. It was an information network that required no special training to access, making the auditory channel the most immediate and democratic medium available. This established a clear sensory hierarchy, a culture built more on hearing than on seeing. Your primary experience of authority, time, and communal belonging was not something you read, but something you heard. The soundscape itself was the town's living, breathing bulletin board, its public clock, and its emergency siren, all fused into a single, resonant system. This is the core reason why the control of bells was the ultimate prize. To command the sound was to command the very attention of the populace, to shape their reality through the one sense that connected them all, instantly and inescapably. The written word held power, but it was a quiet, distant power. The peal of the bell was power in its most direct and visceral form, a force that could not be ignored. A new kind of machine began to whisper in the studies of the wealthy and the halls of merchants. The mechanical clock, with its intricate gears and steady tick, offered a private version of time that did not need to be shouted from a tower. This was a quiet revolution, one that started in the 14th century and gained power with each passing decade. For the first time, the schedule could be consulted in a room on a desk without a single soul in the street knowing your business. The most profound shift came with the pocket watch, a device that allowed a person to carry their own personal timekeeper, a private bell that rang for their eyes alone. The authority of time was slowly migrating from the public sphere into the private pocket. This was a monumental change in human consciousness. Time was no longer a shared experience, a collective rhythm imposed for the good of the community. It became an individual possession, a personal resource to be managed, saved, or wasted. The very concept of punctuality was born from this shift. You were no longer late for the town bell. You were late for your own appointment, for a meeting you had personally scheduled. Responsibility for your time shifted from the communal ear to the individual conscience. The bell's voice did not fall silent overnight, of course. It still rang for mass and for curfew, but its absolute monopoly was broken. Its call became one signal among many, a reminder rather than a command. You could glance at your pocket watch and decide you had a few more minutes before you needed to respond to the bell's peal. This new autonomy fostered a different relationship with work and society. The artisan could set his own pace based on his private clock, not the public one. The merchant could coordinate complex deals across towns using synchronized timepieces. The communal heartbeat that had pulsed through the soundscape for centuries was being replaced by the quiet, separate ticking of a million individual hearts. The world was turning inward, and the shared acoustic reality that had held the medieval town together was beginning to fade into memory, replaced by the silent, precise tyranny of the clock face. Our modern world still hums with the echoes of that medieval soundscape. Though we no longer live by the bell's absolute rule, the blueprint it created for public life remains deeply embedded in our daily routines. Consider the school bell, for instance. Its name is a direct linguistic fossil, a remnant of a time when a bell's ring commanded the start and end of all labor. While its sound might be an electric buzzer now, its function is identical, segmenting the day into manageable periods and synchronizing the movement of hundreds of students, just as the prime bell once orchestrated a town's artisans. This is the legacy of sonic scheduling, alive and well in our institutions. The urgent wail of a siren is the direct descendant of the medieval tocsin, the alarm bell. Its piercing tone cuts through the noise of modern life to deliver a universal message of danger, commanding our attention and compelling action, whether it calls firefighters to their station or warns a community to take shelter from a tornado. The technology has advanced, but the fundamental purpose remains unchanged: to broadcast critical information instantly to the entire public. And in countless towns and cities, the church bell still rings out for Sunday service or to mark a wedding, a continuous sonic thread stretching back centuries. This is not merely tradition for tradition's sake. It is an auditory tether to a past where community and faith were announced through the air. Even the cheerful, repetitive jingle of an ice cream truck operates on this ancient principle. Its unique melody creates a tiny, mobile soundscape, summoning children from their homes and creating a momentary, shared experience centered around a specific signal. These are all fragments of the medieval auditory world, where your place in society and your daily actions were defined by the sounds you collectively heard. We have simply swapped the single, dominant voice of the bronze bell for a chorus of specialized signals, each one a testament to an era that understood the profound power of a shared sound to build a community and command its attention. The Belfry of Bruges did not just tell time, it told a city how to live. Rising over the main market square, this stone tower housed an entire orchestra of bells, a complex instrument known as a carillon, and its voice was the ultimate authority in one of Europe's wealthiest trading hubs. Every aspect of the city's commercial life was scheduled by its precise musical commands. A specific sequence of notes would ring out to signal the official opening of the cloth hall, sending merchants into a flurry of activity. A different, more urgent melody would announce the closing of the city gates at dusk, a critical security measure in a port city teeming with foreign traders and valuable goods. And the moment a fire was spotted, the carillon would erupt into a frantic, discordant clangor, a sonic alarm that mobilized bucket brigades across every canal and street. This was public safety, economic regulation, and civic timekeeping, all broadcast from a single, dominant spire. The soundscape of Bruges was a finely tuned economy of noise. The powerful merchant guilds did not simply listen to the bells, they owned the right to ring them. The fishmongers, the butchers, the wool weavers, and the shippers all possessed specific, hard-won ringing rights, each with their own distinct auditory signature. This created a precise, layered auditory schedule for commerce. A citizen did not need a written timetable to know when the fish market was open for business. They simply waited for the fishmonger's bell to sound its unique call. This system prevented chaos, ensuring that the bustling square did not become a cacophony of competing sales, but a disciplined sequence of economic activity. The quality and sheer number of bells in the belfry were not just a matter of civic pride, they were an audible display of the city's immense wealth. A rich, harmonious peal from dozens of finely tuned bronze bells was the sonic equivalent of a gold coin, a boast that could be heard for miles, attracting more business and reinforcing Bruges' status as a commercial powerhouse. Yet the control of this sonic landmark was never secure. The history of the belfry is a chronicle of conflict between the city council and the church, a physical struggle over who commanded the city's rhythm. The civic leaders, representing the new mercantile power, fought tirelessly to control the belfry and its carillon, understanding that whoever controlled the bells controlled the flow of commerce and information. The church, for its part, resisted this secular encroachment on what had long been a spiritual domain. This tension often erupted into direct action. There were periods when the city council physically seized the bell ropes, barring the clergy from ringing calls to prayer that might interfere with market hours or civic announcements. In retaliation, the church might use its influence to have the carillon silenced, a spiritual punishment that also brought economic life to a grinding halt. The belfry itself, repeatedly damaged by fires and rebuilt ever taller, stands as a stone monument to this perpetual negotiation. Its height was a declaration, ensuring the civic voice would always carry farther than the spiritual one, that the laws of the market would ultimately drown out the calls of the cathedral. In the air over Bruges, you could hear the very essence of medieval urban life, a perfect convergence of scheduled work, negotiated power, and the communal bonds forged by a shared sound. That resonant echo was the architecture of daily life itself, a sonic blueprint for a society built on collective hearing. We have traced its journey from a simple herder's noisemaker to the master of time, a tool of social control, and a living character in folklore and war. It scheduled the peasant's labor and the merchant's profit, its voice the ultimate negotiation table where church and state battled for the public ear. It comforted the dying, fought off storms, and when silenced, became a weapon more potent than any sword. This exploration reveals a profound truth, that history is not just something we see in dusty artifacts or faded manuscripts. It is something we can hear. The rhythms of power, faith, and community were once broadcast through the air, etched into the consciousness of every person by the relentless bronze voice in the tower. The next time you hear a distant bell, perhaps from a town clock or a quiet church, pause for a moment. You are not just hearing a chime marking the hour. You are listening to the ghost of a system that once organized entire worlds, a resonant whisper from a time when our reality was woven together by sound. If this journey into the secret life of bells has resonated with you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the hidden histories that shape our present.